The explosion tore through the air 3 feet from Marcus Hale's head, and in that fragment of a second, that infinite suspended moment before the shockwave hit, he saw his daughter's face. Not the memory of her. The actual face. 7 years old, gap-toothed, laughing in their backyard in Pennsylvania, while he pushed her on the swing he'd built with his own hands. The same hands that now gripped a modified M1A1 bazooka, a weapon that wasn't supposed to exist. The concussion slammed into him like a freight train. His ears screamed. The world tilted sideways. Mud and cordite and the copper taste of blood filled his mouth as he hit the ground hard, the Norman soil cold and unforgiving beneath him. "Hale, move!" Sergeant Billy Kowalski's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. Marcus rolled left, just as another German Panzer IV shell cratered the exact spot where he'd been lying. The earth erupted, a geyser of mud, grass, and shrapnel that rained down like God's own judgment. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was an engineer, a civilian contractor. He designed things on paper, in the safety of a workshop in Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. He wasn't supposed to be here, 4 miles inland from Omaha Beach, with the bodies of American boys bleeding into French soil, and the Wehrmacht's 12th SS Panzer Division trying to push the Allied advance back into the English Channel. But his invention, his illegal modification, had changed everything. "Hale, the nozzle. Does it work, or did you just get 30 men killed for nothing?" Kowalski's face was a mask of mud and fury. The sergeant was 23 but looked 50. 3 days of continuous combat since D-Day had carved years into his features. Behind him, the remnants of Easy Company huddled in a drainage ditch, pinned down by 2 German tanks advancing through the hedgerow country, the bocage, that made Normandy a natural fortress. Marcus's hands shook as he checked the bazooka. The standard M1A1 had an effective range of about 300 yards against armor. Beyond that, the rocket lost accuracy and penetrating power. The Panzers knew this. They stayed at 400 yards, methodically shredding American positions with 75mm cannon fire, while remaining invulnerable to the weapons that were supposed to stop them. But Marcus had changed the math. 6 months ago, in a workshop that smelled of machine oil and coffee, Marcus Hale had committed what his superiors called gross insubordination and what he called solving a problem. The Army Ordnance Department had rejected his proposal for a redesigned rocket nozzle, claimed it was unnecessary, too expensive, and would require retooling production lines during wartime. So he built one anyway. He'd used his own money, worked nights, called in favors from machinists who owed him. The new nozzle design created a Venturi effect that stabilized the rocket's flight path and increased its velocity by 37%. On paper, it should double the bazooka's effective range. On paper. Paper didn't shake, paper didn't bleed. Paper didn't have a 7-year-old daughter named Sarah who wrote him letters in crayon asking when Daddy was coming home. "Hale!" Kowalski grabbed his shoulder. "I need an answer." Marcus looked at the modified weapon in his hands. The new nozzle gleamed dully in the gray morning light. Machined aluminum, precision engineered, theoretically perfect. He'd tested it exactly once, at a controlled range in Maryland. It had worked. But that was shooting at a stationary target in calm conditions, not in combat with adrenaline turning his hands to water and German steel trying to kill him. "It'll work," Marcus heard himself say. "You sure?" No, he wasn't sure. He was terrified. Every equation, every calculation, every sleepless night in the workshop. It all came down to this moment. If he was wrong, men would die trusting a weapon that failed them. If he was right, he might just save them. "Load it," Marcus said. Private Tommy Chen, a kid from San Francisco who looked barely old enough to shave, crawled forward with a rocket. His hands trembled as he slid it into the tube. The rocket was heavier than standard issue. Marcus had increased the propellant charge to match the new nozzle's capability. Another unauthorized modification. Another court-martial offense. Another chance. "Range to target?" Marcus asked. Kowalski squinted through the smoke. "Lead Panzers at 420 yards. Maybe 430. Impossible range for a standard bazooka. The Germans knew it. They were advancing slowly, confidently, their machine guns raking the American positions. Marcus could hear the screaming, wounded men calling for medics who couldn't reach them. He thought of Sarah again. Wondered if she'd understand someday why her father had done this, why he'd broken the rules, why he'd risked everything on an idea that the experts said wouldn't work. "Get me an angle," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. Kowalski and Chen created a firing position using a dead tree and what remained of a stone wall. Marcus settled in, the bazooka heavy on his shoulder. Through the sight, he could see the lead panzer clearly, a gray monster adorned with the white crosses of the Wehrmacht, its cannon sweeping for targets. Inside that tank were men, German men, sons, maybe fathers. They were trying to kill him, yes, but they were human beings following orders, just like the Americans bleeding in the ditches around him. War didn't care about nuance. Marcus exhaled slowly, adjusted his aim. The mathematics flooded his mind. Trajectory, wind speed, the increased velocity of the modified rocket, the angle of impact needed to penetrate the panzer's frontal armor. His finger found the trigger. "Backblast clear," Kowalski shouted. Marcus squeezed. The world exploded in fire and thunder. The rocket screamed from the tube, the new nozzle directing the exhaust with precision that the original design could never achieve. Marcus watched, time stretching again, as the projectile arced through the morning air, a messenger of mathematics and desperation. 425 yards. The rocket struck the panzer's frontal glacis plate at a perfect 90-degree angle. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the tank's ammunition cooked off. The explosion tore the turret clean from the chassis, sending it tumbling through the air like a child's discarded toy. Flames roared from the hull. Black smoke pillared into the sky. Silence fell over the battlefield. Then Kowalski started laughing. "Holy Mother of God, you did it. You actually did it." The 2nd Panzer was already reversing, its commander understanding that the rules had just changed. The Americans weren't helpless anymore. Marcus lowered the bazooka. His hands still shook. His ears still rang. But something else filled him now. Not pride, not joy. Something darker, heavier. He'd just proven that his design worked, that his unauthorized, illegal modification could kill at twice the range of standard bazookas. He'd saved American lives today. And he'd just guaranteed that his invention would kill thousands more. Kowalski clapped him on the back. "We need to get you back to command. They need to see this. Every bazooka in the European theater needs this nozzle." Marcus nodded numbly. Yes, they would mass-produce it now. Manufacture thousands. His design would spread across armies, across years, maybe across future wars. The equation that had started in his workshop would echo through history, each echo measured and destroyed tanks and burning men. He thought of Sarah's last letter. She'd drawn a picture of him, a stick figure with a huge smile, wearing a suit and tie, holding her hand. "My daddy the engineer," she'd written in wobbly letters. Not "my daddy the weapons designer," not "my daddy who made better ways to kill," just engineer. As Easy Company began to advance through the gap he'd created, Marcus Hale sat in the mud of Normandy and wondered if his daughter would ever understand the difference between building and destroying, or if there even was one anymore. The briefing room smelled of wet wool and stale cigarette smoke. Marcus sat at a scarred wooden table in what had been a French farmhouse before the war turned it into headquarters for the 29th Infantry Division. Outside, the rain had returned, a constant, miserable drizzle that turned Normandy into an ocean of mud. Inside, a dozen officers stared at him like he was either a savior or a war criminal. Maybe both. "Let me understand this correctly, Mr. Hale." Colonel James Pritchard leaned forward, his Kentucky drawl stretched thin by exhaustion. "You modified Army ordnance without authorization. You manufactured prototypes using civilian contractors. You conducted unauthorized field tests, and now you're sitting here telling me this invention can change how we fight this war." Marcus met his gaze. "Yes, sir." That's insane. Yes, sir. It probably is. Pritchard's weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile in another lifetime. I like you, Hale. You're either the bravest son of a bitch I've ever met or the dumbest. Can't decide which. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. I don't care which I am. I care that yesterday, Sergeant Kowalski and 37 men from Easy Company are still breathing because my nozzle design works. The Germans are keeping their armor at 400 yards because they know our bazookas can't touch them at that range. They're wrong now. They just don't know it yet. Major Robert Chen, no relation to Private Tommy Chen, tapped ash from his cigarette. The Ordnance Department rejected your proposal 8 months ago. Do you remember why? Marcus remembered every word of that rejection letter. He'd read it so many times the paper had worn thin along the folds. They said retooling production would delay bazooka manufacturing by 6 weeks. They said the improvement didn't justify the cost. And yet you proceeded anyway. I did. Why? The question hung in the air like smoke. Why? Such a small word for such a complicated answer. Because he'd seen the after-action reports from North Africa, from Sicily, from Italy. Reports that were classified but not classified enough to keep an Ordnance Corps civilian contractor from reading them. Reports that described American infantry being massacred by German armor because their anti-tank weapons couldn't reach far enough. Because every night when he closed his eyes, he saw stick figures burning in metal coffins. Because he was an engineer, and engineers solved problems, and this was a problem that was killing boys who should have been in college or working on farms or kissing girls at soda fountains. Because it was the right thing to do, Marcus said quietly. Pritchard exchanged glances with Chen. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind that happened between men who'd fought together, bled together, buried friends together. Show us, Pritchard said finally. The demonstration took place in a muddy field 2 miles behind the front lines. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained the color of old bruises. They'd captured a German Panther tank the previous day, a beast of a machine with frontal armor that standard bazookas couldn't penetrate even at point-blank range. Marcus stood beside the modified M1A1, feeling the weight of a dozen sets of eyes. Sergeant Kowalski was there, along with Tommy Chen and half of Easy Company. Word had spread. The miracle weapon that had killed a panzer at impossible range. Men wanted to see if it was real or just another piece of wartime mythology. Range markers are set at 100-yard intervals, Major Chen announced. Mr. Hale will engage the target from 400 yards. Standard doctrine says a bazooka is ineffective beyond 300. Marcus checked the weapon one more time. New nozzle secure. Rocket loaded. Another modified round with increased propellant. His hands had stopped shaking. Strange. Yesterday, in combat, he'd been terrified. Today, demonstrating for officers, he felt calm. Maybe it was easier to face judgment than death. Or maybe he'd already died a little yesterday, and this was just the paperwork. Backblast clear, Kowalski called. Marcus sighted on the Panther. Even disabled and abandoned, it looked predatory, dangerous. He thought about the German crew that had operated it. Where were they now? Dead, captured, retreated to fight another day. He squeezed the trigger. The rocket leaped from the tube with that same banshee shriek. 400 yards. The projectile struck the Panther's frontal armor and detonated. When the smoke cleared, a ragged hole gaped in the glacier's plate, a wound that would have killed everyone inside if the tank had been operational. Silence. Then somebody started clapping. Then everybody was clapping. Even Pritchard, who'd probably seen every kind of weapon demonstration imaginable, looked impressed. Gentlemen, the colonel said, his voice carrying across the field. I believe we're looking at the future of American anti-tank warfare. Marcus should have felt triumphant. Vindicated. Instead, he felt hollow. Like he'd just signed a contract written in blood. That evening, they gave him a tent and a bottle of bourbon. Neither helped. Marcus sat on a canvas cot, listening to the distant rumble of artillery, the constant soundtrack of war. He'd written 3 letters to Sarah and torn up all 3. What could he say? Dear sweetheart, Daddy made something that kills people really well today. Aren't you proud? A knock at the tent post. Kowalski ducked inside without waiting for permission. The sergeant looked better than he had yesterday. Cleaner, at least, though the exhaustion remained carved into his features. You did good today, Hale. Did I? Kowalski sat down uninvited, pulling out his own flask. You saved my life yesterday. Saved Tommy Chen's life. Saved 37 men who get to write letters home tonight because of you. Yeah, you did good. And how many German boys won't write letters home because of what I invented? Probably a lot. Kowalski took a long drink. You want me to tell you that's okay? That they're the enemy and they deserve it? I can't. I've seen their faces when they're dying. They look just like our boys. Scared. Young. Calling for their mothers. Then how do you live with it? I don't know if I do. But I know this. Every American soldier who survives this war because your Nozzle kept a Panzer from killing him, that's a win. Every German soldier who dies because their tank couldn't stay at safe range, that's on Hitler and his gang of bastards, not on you. Marcus wanted to believe that. Needed to believe it. But the equation didn't balance so neatly in his mind. Every action had consequences that rippled outward in ways no one could predict. They're going to mass produce it, Marcus said. Pritchard told me. Orders are already going back to Aberdeen. Within 2 months, every bazooka team in the European theater will have the modified Nozzle. Good. Is it? What happens after this war, Kowalski? What happens when the next war starts, and both sides have weapons I helped design? What happens when some engineer in Germany or Russia or China looks at my design and makes it even better? Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. You know what my old man used to say? He was a coal miner in Pennsylvania. Dangerous work. Men died all the time. He said, Billy, you can't control what happens after you leave the mine. You can only control what you do while you're in it. That's not very comforting. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be true. Kowalski stood, heading for the tent exit. Get some sleep, Hale. Tomorrow Major Chen wants you to brief the infantry tactics officers on how to employ your weapon system. You're going to teach men how to kill with something you invented. That's your mine. That's where you are. After Kowalski left, Marcus sat in the darkness and thought about mines, about descending into dangerous places, about the men who went down and never came back up. He picked up the pencil again. Started another letter. Dear Sarah, he wrote. Daddy did something important today. Something that might help end the war sooner. I want you to know that everything I do hoping it will make the world safer for little girls like you. I hope that's true. I hope I'm not lying to both of us. He stared at the words for a long time. Then he folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket. He'd send it tomorrow. Or the day after. Or never. Outside, the artillery rumbled. The sound of the world destroying itself, one shell at a time, with the help of men like him who solved problems and called it progress. Marcus Hale closed his eyes and tried not to see the stick figures burning. 3 weeks later, Marcus Hale stood in the ruins of St. Lo and watched his invention change the war. The city, what remained of it, looked like God had taken a hammer to creation. Every building had been bombed, shelled, or burned. The streets were canyons of rubble where American and German forces had fought building by building, room by room, sometimes hand to hand. The locals called it the capital of ruins. Marcus thought that was too poetic. It was just destruction. Pure, absolute mathematical destruction. And his modified bazooka had helped create it. Mr. Hale? Lieutenant David Morrison appeared at his elbow, young and eager in a way that made Marcus feel ancient, despite being only 34. The tank destroyers are ready for your inspection. Tank destroyers. That's what they called the bazooka teams now. Specialized units equipped with his Nozzle design, trained in new tactics that exploited the weapon's extended range. In 3 weeks, production had ramped up faster than anyone thought possible. Aberdeen Proving Ground had retooled 2 entire assembly lines. Modified bazookas were flooding into France by the thousands. The first after-action reports had come in yesterday. In the fighting around St. Lo, American forces had destroyed 47 German tanks, 31 of them with modified bazookas at ranges previously considered impossible. Casualties among bazooka teams had dropped by 60% because they could engage armor from safer distances. 60% fewer American boys burning in the blast radius of tank cannons. Marcus should have felt something. Pride? Relief? Instead, he felt numb. "Lead the way, Lieutenant." The tank destroyer teams had set up in what used to be a church. The roof was gone, the walls pocked with shrapnel, but 3 walls still stood, and that passed for luxury in St. Lo. 6 two-man teams waited, their modified bazookas propped carefully against the ruined pews. They looked at Marcus the way medieval peasants must have looked at wizards. Part reverence, part fear, entirely certain he possessed powers they couldn't understand. "Gentlemen," Morrison said, "this is Marcus Hale, the civilian contractor who designed the modification system you're using." "Civilian?" One of the soldiers, a corporal with a Tennessee accent and a face that hadn't seen 20 years yet, frowned. "Sir, no disrespect, but you look like you've been through hell." Marcus glanced down at himself. The corporal wasn't wrong. His civilian clothes were filthy. His hands bore burns from helping load rockets during a firefight 2 days ago, and he probably smelled like cordite and death. Somewhere along the way, the line between civilian contractor and combatant had blurred into irrelevance. "Hell's relative, Corporal. You boys have been in it longer than me." That got a few grim chuckles. Marcus spent the next hour going over technical details, proper maintenance of the modified nozzle, how to identify manufacturing defects, optimal firing angles for different ranges. It was easier to talk about engineering than to think about why they needed to know this. Afterward, a private approached him. Hispanic kid, couldn't have been more than 19. His name tape read, Garcia. "Mr. Hale, I just wanted to say, thank you. 3 days ago, me and my partner took out a panther at 400 yards. Thing was about to overrun an aid station. 30 wounded guys who couldn't move. Your design saved their lives." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Garcia continued, oblivious to the storm building behind Marcus's eyes. "My brother's a patient at that aid station. Took shrapnel in the legs during the landings. He's gonna make it home now because of what you invented. My whole family's gonna know your name, sir. My kids, when I have 'em, they're gonna know the man who saved their uncle." The private saluted, crisply, formally, with genuine respect, and walked away. Marcus stood in the ruined church and tried to breathe. Garcia's gratitude should have felt good. It should have meant something. Instead, it felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, crushing him into the rubble-strewn floor. How many German families would curse his name? How many brothers, sons, fathers had burned in tanks that his engineering had destroyed? "Mr. Hale?" Morrison again, always appearing at the wrong moment. Or maybe the right moment. "General Bradley wants to see you." Omar Bradley's command post was in a chateau that had somehow survived mostly intact. One of those inexplicable quirks of war where destruction passed by beauty for no logical reason. The general himself stood over a map table, moving unit markers with the focused intensity of a chess master. "Hale." Bradley looked up, his features as rumpled and tired as everyone else's in this war. "Sit. Coffee?" "Thank you, sir." Bradley poured 2 cups from a battered percolator. "You know what I love about engineers? You think in problems and solutions. No politics, no ideology. Just, here's an issue. Here's the fix." He sipped his coffee. "That's refreshing in this business. I'm not sure I feel like much of a problem solver lately, General." "No, your modified bazooka has already changed our tactical doctrine. We're training entire battalions around its capabilities. Intelligence reports suggest the Germans are pulling their armor back, trying to maintain standoff distances that don't work anymore." Bradley tapped the map. You've given American infantry a weapon that scares German tank commanders. Do you understand how significant that is? Marcus stared at his coffee. I understand that I've made it easier to kill people. You've made it easier to keep our people alive. There's a difference. Is there? Bradley sat down across from him, suddenly looking less like a general and more like a tired man carrying impossible burdens. You want me to absolve you, Hale? Tell you that every Nazi you've helped kill had it coming? I can't do that. War doesn't have clean hands. But I can tell you this. Every day this war continues, more people die. French civilians, Jewish prisoners, our boys, their boys, everyone. Anything that shortens this war, that brings victory closer, saves lives in aggregate even if it costs lives individually. That's a hell of a moral calculus, sir. It's the only one I've got. Bradley pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. This is why I wanted to see you. Intelligence has identified a new German tank, the Tiger II. Heaviest armor we've encountered. Frontal plate is nearly impervious to everything we have, including your modified bazookas at standard combat ranges. Marcus opened the folder. Technical drawings, reconnaissance photos, captured documents. The Tiger II was a monster, 68 tons of steel and fury, armed with an 88mm cannon that could kill a Sherman tank at 2,000 yards. You're asking me to modify the modification. I'm asking you to keep being an engineer. Here's a problem. Find me a solution. Marcus looked at the diagrams. His mind, trained by a decade of engineering education and another decade of practical application, automatically began calculating. Increased propellant load would give more velocity, but might crack the nozzle housing. A shaped charge would penetrate better but required completely redesigning the warhead. Maybe a tandem charge system or... He stopped himself, looked up at Bradley. Sir, when does it end? I make this better. The Germans make their armor thicker. I counter that. They counter my counter. It's an arms race with no finish line. Just an infinite spiral of escalation. It ends when one side can't escalate anymore. When the cost of continuing exceeds the cost of surrendering. That's how every war in history has ended. Bradley's voice was gentle but unyielding. You want to stop being part of that machine? I can send you home tomorrow. No shame in it. You've done more than any civilian contractor should have to do. But if you leave, someone else will solve this problem. Maybe not as well as you, maybe not as quickly, and every day of delay is another day of this. Bradley gestured out the window at the ruins of St. Lo. Marcus thought about Sarah, about going home, about being just an engineer again, designing tractors or bridges or something that built instead of destroyed. It was so tempting he could taste it, sweet and impossible as a dream. But Garcia's brother was going home because Marcus had stayed. Kowalski was alive because Marcus had stayed. How many more could he save if he kept solving problems? How many more would die because he did? I'll need a workshop, Marcus heard himself say. Access to captured German technical documents, and at least 2 weeks. Bradley nodded slowly. You'll have whatever you need. One condition, sir. Name it. When this war ends, when we win, and we will win, I'm done. No Korea if that heats up. No next war. No more weapons. I want to go home and build swings for my daughter and never think about shaped charges or armor penetration again. Deal. Bradley extended his hand. They shook on it. A contract sealed between a general and an engineer in a chateau in France while the world burned outside. Marcus left with the folder under his arm, already thinking about propellant chemistry and nozzle thermodynamics, already descending back into the mine. Behind him, Bradley returned to his maps and his markers and his own impossible calculations of death and victory. 2 men trying to solve problems. 2 men making the world more efficiently lethal, one equation at a time. Berlin fell on May 2nd, 1945. Marcus Hale heard the news in a workshop in Reims, France, surrounded by blueprints and burnt coffee and the ghosts of 18 months of engineering warfare. The radio crackled with reports of Soviet flags flying over the Reichstag, of Hitler dead in his bunker, of a Third Reich that had promised 1,000 years collapsing after 12. The war in Europe was over. Marcus set down his pencil, the same pencil he'd used to sketch the original Nozzle modification in Maryland a lifetime ago, and walked outside. The spring air smelled of apple blossoms instead of cordite. Birds sang. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear laughter. When was the last time he'd heard laughter? "Mr. Hale!" Lieutenant Morrison came running, younger than ever despite everything he'd seen. "Did you hear? It's over. We won." We won. Such simple words, such terrible weight. "I heard, Lieutenant. They're saying the modified bazookas destroyed over 3,000 German tanks. 3,000. Your invention, sir. You helped win the war." 3,000 tanks. Marcus did the math automatically, couldn't help himself after all these months. Average crew of 5 per tank, 15,000 men. Not all would have died, some would have escaped, but even if only half perished, that was still. He stopped calculating. Some equations weren't meant to be solved. "I'm going home, Lieutenant. Tell General Bradley I'm grateful, but our deal stands. I'm done." Morrison's enthusiasm dimmed. "Sir, there's talk of a conflict brewing in the Pacific Theater. The Japanese are someone else's problem, not mine. Never mine again." Marcus walked back into the workshop and began packing his things. It didn't take long. He'd accumulated almost nothing in 18 months. Some clothes, technical manuals, letters from Sarah that he'd read until the paper wore thin. The blueprints stayed. Let the army keep them. Let them do whatever they wanted with his designs. He was finished building better ways to kill. The transport ship smelled of oil and sweat and men who couldn't quite believe they'd survived. Marcus stood at the rail, watching France disappear into the horizon. Somewhere back there, his workshop still stood. His calculations still covered blackboards. His modifications still sat in weapons depots waiting for the next war. Because there would be a next war. There always was. "Heading home?" A voice beside him. Marcus turned to find Sergeant Kowalski, promoted to staff sergeant now, wearing ribbons that told a story of blood and survival. "Kowalski, thought you'd shipped out last week." "Got delayed. Paperwork." Kowalski lit a cigarette, offered one to Marcus. They smoked in silence for a while, watching the ocean roll beneath the ship. "You ever wonder if we did the right thing?" "Every day." "Me too." Kowalski exhaled smoke that the wind tore away. "But then I think about the guys who made it home because of what we did. Garcia's gonna be an uncle. His brother married his sweetheart last month. Tommy Chen's going to Berkeley, gonna be a doctor. 37 men from Easy Company are alive right now, drinking beer and kissing girls and having futures because you broke some rules and built something that worked. And how many German boys don't have futures because of what I built? A lot." Kowalski didn't flinch from the truth. "But they started it, Hale. They invaded Poland. They murdered millions. They would have kept going if we hadn't stopped them. You didn't create this war. You just helped end it." Marcus wanted to believe that. Needed to believe it. But the equations kept running in his head. Action and reaction. Force and counterforce. The endless physics of violence. "What are you going to do now?" Marcus asked. "Go back to Pennsylvania. Work in the mines like my old man. Maybe marry Betty Sullivan if she'll still have me. Live a quiet life and try to forget." Kowalski stubbed out his cigarette. "You?" "Same. Well, engineering instead of mining. But the rest? Quiet life. Try to forget." Marcus smiled grimly. "Think we'll manage it?" "Not a chance in hell." They both laughed. The dark, knowing laughter of men who'd seen too much to ever be quite whole again. Pennsylvania in June was everything Marcus remembered, and nothing like he'd left. The trees were the same. The house was the same. Even the swing he'd built for Sarah still hung in the backyard, though it looked smaller now, sadder, like it had been waiting too long for someone to return. Sarah stood on the porch, no longer 7, but 9. 2 years. He'd missed 2 years of her life. 2 birthdays, 2 Christmases, countless bedtimes and scraped knees and school days. The letters had tried to bridge the gap, but letters were poor substitutes for presents. "Daddy?" Her voice was uncertain, like she was checking that he was real. Marcus dropped his duffel bag and opened his arms. Sarah ran to him, and for the first time in 18 months, something in his chest unclenched. She smelled like Johnson's baby shampoo and home. She felt solid and real in a way nothing had felt real since Normandy. "I'm home, sweetheart. I'm home." His wife Ellen appeared in the doorway, older than he remembered, worry lines etched around her eyes. They'd talked about divorce before he left. His obsession with the Nozzle design had nearly destroyed their marriage. But she'd waited, written letters, kept the home fires burning while he built better fires overseas. Marcus. Just his name, but it held everything. Relief, anger, love, exhaustion, hope. "I'm sorry, Ellen. For everything. For leaving. For what I became over there. You're home now. That's what matters." Was it? Marcus wasn't sure. Part of him was still in France, still calculating trajectories and armor penetration. Part of him would always be there, in the workshop, in the ruins, in the moment he chose to keep solving problems that killed people. But Sarah's arms were around his neck, and Ellen was smiling despite the tears. And maybe, he could learn to be just an engineer again, just a father, just a man who built swings instead of weapons. That night, after Sarah fell asleep clutching his hand like she was afraid he'd disappear again, Marcus sat in his old workshop. It looked exactly as he'd left it. Tools on pegboards, half-finished projects gathering dust, blueprints for a bridge design he'd abandoned to work on the bazooka modification. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, picked up his pencil, started sketching. Not a weapon. Not this time. A playground. Swings and slides and monkey bars, engineered for maximum safety and joy. Something that would make children laugh instead of making soldiers die. It felt strange, uncomfortable even, like learning to write with his non-dominant hand, but it felt necessary. The pencil moved across the paper, confident lines, precise angles, the muscle memory of engineering translated into creation instead of destruction. Marcus worked through the night, designing and refining, losing himself in problems that had nothing to do with killing. Dawn found him surrounded by sketches of playgrounds, treehouse designs, plans for a gazebo Ellen had mentioned wanting years ago. Small things, human things, things that wouldn't echo through history or change the course of wars. Ellen found him there as sunrise painted the workshop gold. "Marcus, did you sleep at all?" Couldn't, kept seeing. He gestured vaguely at the air, at the ghosts only he could see. "So I started building. Just on paper for now, but I'll make them real. All of them. I'm going to spend the rest of my life building things that make people happy, Ellen. I have to. I have to balance the scales somehow." She looked at the sketches spread across his workbench, page after page of structures designed for joy, for safety, for life. Something softened in her face. "You can't unbuild what you built over there, Marcus. Those weapons exist now. That's done. I know. But I can choose what I build next. That's not done. That's just beginning." Ellen kissed the top of his head, a gesture so simple and human it almost broke him. "Then let's begin. Sarah wants a new swing. The old one's getting small for her." Marcus smiled. A real smile this time, not the ghosts of smiles he'd worn through the war. "I'll start today." The modified bazooka nozzle became standard issue in the U.S. Army. It was used in Korea, in Vietnam, in conflicts across decades. Military historians would later credit it with fundamentally changing infantry anti-armor tactics. Engineers would study its design in textbooks. Soldiers would carry weapons bearing its principles into battles Marcus would never see, in wars he tried not to think about. But Marcus Hale never designed another weapon. He built playgrounds, designed bridges, consulted on factory safety systems. He made Sarah's swing, the best damn swing in Pennsylvania, engineered with the same precision he'd once applied to killing machines. He taught her to pump her legs, to fly higher, to laugh as the world fell away beneath her. Some nights, he still dreamed of burning tanks and German boys calling for their mothers. Some nights, the equations ran in his head, trajectories and velocities, and the mathematics of destruction. Those nights, he'd go to his workshop and sketch something beautiful. A gazebo, a fountain, a bridge, something that connected instead of destroyed. On his deathbed, 40 years later, Sarah, now a civil engineer herself, following in her father's footsteps, asked him the question that had haunted him through decades of playground construction and bridge design and determined desperate creation. "Dad, do you regret it? The bazooka? What you did in the war?" Marcus looked at his daughter, brilliant, compassionate, building things that made the world better, and thought about the impossible calculus of war and peace, of creation and destruction, of the choices that defined a life. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally. "I regret every life it took. But I don't regret trying to save the lives I could save. The world needed someone to solve that problem, and I was the one with the pencil in my hand." He squeezed her fingers weakly. "But I'm grateful, so grateful, that afterward, I got to put that pencil to better use. I got to build things for you, with you. That's what I choose to remember." Sarah cried, but she understood. She'd spent her life building bridges that connected communities, that brought people together. She'd learned from his mistakes and his redemptions both. Marcus Hale died on a spring morning with apple blossoms blooming outside his window, surrounded by blueprints for playgrounds he'd designed, and photographs of bridges he'd built, and the knowledge that he'd done both terrible and wonderful things with the same hands, the same mind, the same stubborn refusal to accept problems as unsolvable. His last thought was of Sarah on a swing, flying toward the sky, laughing like the world was full of nothing but possibilities. And maybe, just maybe, that was the equation that mattered most. Thakinand.